Okay, you're on mute, I think.
Apologies, everyone. Thank you for letting me speak English, was what I was just saying before I was on mute. I did spend 2 months in Ecuador almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. At that point, I could speak a bit of Spanish, but it's all completely faded. So my apologies that you're hearing me in English. So what I wanted to do today, building on what Life had been talking about, is how you can use futures methods to anticipate in order to have success. And what I wanted to do was start with the story, then move through what are different future methods, why do people use futures. Then we have some questions which will help you to understand your situation and therefore choose the right futures method for you. And there'll be a chance for some little group work as well through that. So moving on to a story. And the story is of an oil company and therefore not necessarily one that is brilliant on sustainability, but nevertheless illustrates how using futures can lead to greater success. So in the late 60s, Shell was known as the ugly sister of the big oil companies because it was in a relatively weak financial position. In 1972, they created a scenario planning group within their planning group, and they had created scenarios, different stories about how the energy market might develop into the future. And one of these stories...
David, can you play the slide?
I am on the slide, I thought. Shall I share again?
Yeah, we saw only the first slide.
I'll stop sharing and try again.
There you go.
Can you share for slide now? Good. Don't know what happened there. It's what I could see, but clearly not what you could see. So in the 60s, Shell was the ugly sister. In 1972, they created their scenarios group. And looking forward, they could see many scenarios where the oil price could soar from what was then the normal price of $2 a barrel to much higher. And they started preparing what they would do if and when that oil price went up. Through the 70s, two things happened which meant that there was a big rise in oil prices. Firstly, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and then secondly, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution. So the price of oil massively went up to $37 a barrel, and Shell was one of the few oil companies who were ready and knew what they would do if that was to happen and put those plans into practice. Then, in the early 80s, when OPEC had control, the industry assumption was that oil prices would stay high for a long time. And people based their future plans on that. But the Shell scenarios pointed out that OPEC could fragment. And so Shell started to prepare for fragmentation, lower prices, and therefore for industry consolidation. Now that, it turns out, is what happened. OPEC fragmented. It reduced its sort of stranglehold on the prices. And through the 1980s, the seven sisters of oil majors started to consolidate. And that meant by the time it came to the 1990s, because Shell had been ready and knew what it would do as the oil price went down, they were one of the two breakout leaders of the oil industry come the early 1990s. And I tell that story because I want to illustrate how by having a range of scenarios and by exploring the future, Shell had a broader, deeper, and more rounded understanding of what was going on, and therefore had superior performance through those decades. Now, it might be easy to think that it takes a big oil and gas company, a big corporation, to be able to use futures, but that's not the case at all. So here are three examples where people have used scenarios or futures on completely different scales. So on the left there is a book. Hopefully my slides have moved on and you can see them. I'll look for nods from Life. Yes, and Pascal. Yeah, this time it's worked. So on the left there is a book by Clem Sunter. He lived in South Africa in the 80s, and he came up with two scenarios. He called them the high road and the low road. And this was about how apartheid might play forward from the 1980s. At that point, black Africans were not allowed to vote. Nelson Mandela was still in jail, and white Afrikaans controlled everything. And what Clem did in his scenarios is he showed that the low road was of the white minority resisting the advance of democracy, and that would only lead to conflict and bad outcomes even for the white population, whereas the high road was of the white population accepting wider democracy and how that could lead to success for South Africa overall. And those scenarios, which were written up in a book and also had some workshops, what was crucial about them is they were read by some of the key white Afrikaans leaders through the mid and late 80s, and really changed their mindsets about what was possible and what they should really be doing. And by comparing the high road with the low road, they decided to take the high road. And that led to, amongst other things, the release of Nelson Mandela and all of the changes of apartheid that followed from that. That's on the left. On the right are two other things of a smaller scale. So the future of protein was some work I was involved with at Forum for the Future over the last decade. Each of those different boxes is a different possible future world, from technofix, transcendence, and so on. And those came out of work with businesses, government, civil society organizations, experts in agriculture, all of whom were thinking about the future of protein. And those scenarios were used in some project work for collaboration and for forming visions of the future. And in a similar way, the civil society futures, also from Forum for the Future, where I used to work, was an exploration of how might UK civil society, how might charities and non-governmental organisations based in the UK and working on UK issues, what might affect them over the next 10 years and what might they do about it? And that was funded by a series of foundations who wanted to influence the civil society for the better in the UK. And so they were using futures as a way of exploring what was possible, what was needed, and turning that into a common direction across civil society. So all of that is to say, using these futures and scenario planning, it can be for anyone. It doesn't just need to be some big corporation. So having given you some stories, what do we mean by futures methods? Well, on the left there is in the big bold type is what we mean. So rigorous techniques to understand what might happen in order to take action now. And there's some examples underneath. We've already talked about scenarios, different plausible futures which you use to plan. Trends is another kind of futures method where you look at how particular issues might play out over time. Horizon scanning is where you look at the edge of what's happening at the moment, at your peripheral vision. In backcasting, you go out to the future that you want, and then you work your way back and say, what would need to be true in each of the steps in order to reach there? And visioning is about creating a preferred future. So each of those are rigorous ways of understanding what might happen in order to take action now. And what makes futures methods different from most planning methods is on the right.
I think,
So
David, I think your slides are stuck again.
they're stuck again.
We're still with the future road sign there, next exit.
Sure, that's underneath the next exit.
Okay.
And your
Sorry about that. Okay,
that's okay.
that's fine.
Underneath the next exit
Right.
is the three different aspects of broader, more rounded and deeper. So the futures methods require you to look at a broader set of trends that than you might normally do so. And most planning, in my experience, in companies and in governments, tends to think the future will be today plus a little bit. But when you use futures methods well, you're looking beyond that. Then the second thing, more rounded, you're looking at a more holistic view. So you're not just taking one source, but many different sources, many different disciplines, and seeing how different issues are connected with one another. And then finally, deeper is about challenging and unpacking the assumptions about the standard views of what's going to happen, really questioning what it is that you think is obvious. Just like Shell did with the oil price, everyone else thought it would be obvious it would stay low in the 70s, stay high in the 80s. That's not how it played out. And by challenging those views, you can move faster towards the future you want than the one other people. So that's what they are. As to why to use them, I do love this quote on the left from Niels Bohr, the Nobel Prize winning Danish physicist. It is very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. And then on the right, we have a futurist maxim. All future predictions are wrong. Some futures methods are useful. And the reason for putting these two quotes up is to say that the reason for using futures methods is not to make the exact prediction about the exact thing that will happen over the next 5 or 10 years. It's not about the prediction, it's about working through your assumptions and understanding more about how the world works so that you are better set up to make decisions now. And so that is why we use futures methods, to have that broader, deeper, and more rounded understanding of what's going on. From that, to be able to generate more options on what you can do for success starting today. By exploring different futures, you create prepared minds that are better able to respond to any event, even ones you've not predicted. Also, using futures methods in a team can create a shared perspective, which can help that team to be a higher performing team. By anticipating risks, you can feed that into your risk management and improve how well you manage those risks. And I'd say that futures methods are useful in an implementation stage where you'll know which direction you want to go in, but how do you get there? You can explore all of that. It's even more useful in design stages when you're trying to figure out what your direction should be in the first place. And underneath those words, you have what's known as the futures cone underneath there, which shows we're starting with today, how all of the different possible futures expand out from today. The vast majority of planning that I see either assumes that the probable world, that blue dot in the middle, is the only one that's worth exploring, or the preferable world, the green dot off to one edge, is the only one that's worth exploring. And therefore people get surprised by the much wider range of plausible and possible worlds that can crop up. And in futurist jargon, wildcard is an event that seemingly happens at random and comes out of nowhere and would be very difficult to predict. So that's what the cone is. Now, one of the things is there are very, very many different futures methods. And this slide just gives 4 of them. So we've already talked about standard planning in the bottom left and forecasting, where you extrapolate trends forward from today in order to better allocate resources. That's the standard way of doing planning. We've also talked about bottom right, scenario planning. That's where you have different stories of different plausible future worlds that you use to explore the variety of what might happen in order to look back to today and be prepared. And Shell is the classic example of that. On the top left, we have road mapping. And that's where you understand what the different developments are and you're able to coordinate them so to create a roadmap which goes from here to your preferred future. And the classic example here is Motorola and silicon chips. So we are all living the benefit of a digital revolution. The reason why we're able to do this Zoom call is because of the ways in which silicon chips have basically halved in price every 18 months for more or less the last 50 years. One of the key reasons why that is the case is that the silicon chip industry has created a series of roadmaps. About every 5 years, they would get together and they would say, what are the technologies which are coming down the pipe? What do we need to do to make sure those technologies speak to each other? And how can we coordinate them so that they really pay off? And that's created this massive and very consistent reduction in price over a long period of time. And that's why we've had the digital revolution, one of the key reasons. And then finally, in the top right, there is 3 horizons. And that's where you are creating a shared vision together and trying to assemble the resources you need to make that happen, even though some aspects of it are not predictable. And an example here would be the Shine project in Fife, which is part of Scotland, here in the United Kingdom. There they got together people who worked in the health and social care sector, so doctors, nurses, health managers, old people's homes, community centres that worked with pensioners. And they said, how do we want to organize ourselves and our services so that people who are towards the end of their life and dependent on old age care, that they can have the best part of their life that they can. How do we organize ourselves to do that? What's going to affect it? And they used these 3 horizon process to understand the status quo, the visionary future, and the innovations to get there. And they run this project for about 12 years, each year coming back together to reforecast and relook at the future, relook at what they're doing now, and relook at the innovations which will get them from where they are now to that visionary future. And that's an example of 3 horizons. And so at that point, I'm going to pause for questions, having given you quite a lot of things around the futures methods and also speaking quite quickly in English, give you a chance to digest and ask any questions that you have now. So over to Leif and anyone who might want to ask me any questions of clarification about futures methods.
Okay.
I think Carolina was speaking, but she may be on mute.
So anybody, any questions?
Yes, I have a question. First, I would like to ask if you can put the slide of the future com.
Sure. There.
Yes, I didn't get the entire idea of how you play with what is the difference between the wild card, the scenario, and the probably unpreferable options that we have to, I don't know, determine what are the possible and plausible options that we have when we plan our methods. So I didn't get that quite exactly.
Sure. There's lots of words beginning with P there, aren't there? And it's quite a complicated diagram. So the idea is that starting from where we are now, as we go forward, more and more variety, more and more things are unpredictable. That's why things go out of the cone. And the furthest extent of the cone is the range of all the things that are possible starting from here. And that's the big widest version. And then one step in is what's plausible. So many things are possible, but if we'd gone back 20 years and said that everybody in a rich country will own a mobile phone and Donald Trump will be president, that would have probably felt like a completely implausible scenario. Nobody would have believed you if you've written that in a scenario, and yet that is the world that we live in today. So things can be possible that don't sound plausible. That's why plausible is inside. There's a narrower cone right at in the middle, which is the probable world, which is the most likely one starting from where we are now. But often when we're planning, we don't want the most probable world. We want something else, which is called the preferable world in this. And that's in green and slightly off to one edge of what's plausible. So that's where that is. So sometimes the probable and the preferable overlap. In this diagram, they don't. Then scenarios are just different stories, different futures that might happen. So within all of the different probables, there we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scenarios, which are in yellow. And then a wild card would be an event which feels very odd and seemingly comes out of nowhere, but which really dramatically affects things. So what might be that? I guess something like Brexit with, I mean, a terrorist event might be like that. So 9/11 from the start of the 2000s, that wasn't highly predicted. Nobody really had seen that coming. But when it came through, it had a massive knock-on effect on a huge portion of what America got up to and therefore the world. And that would count as a wild card. So does that explain for you, Carolina?
Yes, perfectly.
My pleasure.
Okay. David, it would be good if you could finish in a couple of minutes.
Sure.
Awesome.
Shall I go on to the...
Yes, I think so.
Sure. So So because there are so many different methods, you need to understand what your situation is in order to choose the best method. And one of the ways of doing that is using this grid, which I'll now explain to you. And it has two dimensions. The horizontal dimension here is about uncertainty. So if there's low uncertainty, you can confidently predict what's going to happen. If there's high uncertainty, then it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. And the other axis is agency. How much control, how much ability to act do you have? Can you make choices which will affect and be successful? And if you have low agency, you have almost no control. If you have a high agency, then what your choices are make a big difference. And that gives rise to this 2x2 grid, which has these 4 different stations. So box A, you can't control what happens, but you can predict it. Box B, you can't control what happens. Then there are many ways things could turn out. Box C, you can shape what happens and you can predict it. And box D, you can shape what happens, but there are many ways that things could turn out. And so that is the grid to understand your situation. And I think now I'm going to hand back to you, Leif, to ask people to look at which of those quadrants best suits their situation in their work. So over to you, Leif.
Right. Thank you very much. Entonces, ahora vamos a pasar a votar. Voy a pedir que todo el mundo considere en qué cuadro están situados ustedes. De las 4 posibilidades que escogen, la posibilidad donde se sienten que esto define su situación. Y luego vamos a hacer una votación. Matías va a mostrar un cuadro donde se escogen A, B, C y D según el cuadro donde están. I'm going to say it in English as well. So here we need to vote where you think you belong in the one of the 4 boxes, and then please vote in the poll. Al mismo tiempo voy a pedirles una otra cosa, y es que en el chat box abajo que escriben su selección, porque el poll es anónimo y queremos dividirlos en subgrupos de trabajo según su selección. Entonces, si pongan en el chat también la letra que han escogido. Okay, so everybody also write the number that they chose in the chat box so we can divide you into subgroups for discussion, please. So everybody choose their quadrant A, B, C, and D, or D. Okay, there's a lot of D's coming up. You can see that. We still lack a lot of people, so please everyone cast your vote. Por favor que voten y que pongan la letra correspondiente en el chat. Yo veo ya nueva gente que están participando. Luisa, Marlon, Alonso, bienvenidos. Si podrían poner su cámara, sería excelente para que podamos vernos. En un segundo vamos a entrar en grupos de trabajo. Okay, so now we have the poll results. The majority is in the group D, 70%. And then the rest in group B. That was actually almost, we just had the workshop in English with the people from Asia, and that was the other way around. Anyway, so now we have the poll. I'm going to give the word back to David so he can explain more about the options, the methodologies. But David, we need to do it as fast as possible to stay on time, please.
Sure. And I think we still need people to say which letter they are so that Mateus can put them in the right group. So,
Right.
As some of you may have guessed, those 4 methods I mentioned earlier actually map onto those 4 boxes. So A, standard planning, B, scenarios, C, road mapping, and D, 3 horizons. So standard planning, I imagine everyone here will have been involved in it. Use the past experience to predict the period ahead. You can build on what's worked in the past and lessons too. Often people use today plus a couple of %, and that's what the revenue forecast for Netflix on the right there has, constant growth. And one of the things here is to be very wary of the false confidence that a recent stable period gives you. Then we move on to B, scenario planning. So this is when you can't control what happens, and there are many ways that things turn out or could turn out. So how you go about the scenario planning is to first identify who you need to have in the room with you, who you might be working with together or has expertise in what might happen. You need to generate different plausible futures or scenarios. There are many, many different ways of doing this, but the most common and the most known is having 2 axes, like the example on the right there. What you're trying to do is pick 2 axes which are very important to the future world that you're concerned with, very uncertain so that they can go from high to low, or very positive to very negative, and also the 2 axes themselves are not related to each other, so that you can generate 4 different plausible worlds which help you to explore what's possible. And the example on the right there is from some work that Forum did a couple of years ago on the future of urban development and megacities in the developing world. So, and then you end up with 4 different kinds of worlds like that. What you do next is you work in each scenario in turn as if that is the likely future. So you go into it and say, what's the risks, the opportunities, and the successful strategies for our organization, our approach, our desires in this scenario? And then you take a step back and go, well, if that was what works across all of them, what does it mean for us now? And if there are particular risks and particular strategies that work across all of the different scenarios, then they are things you call no regrets. So they're worth doing no matter what happens. There are other things which may only be worth doing if the world takes a particular direction. And in that case, you prepare and be ready for that particular direction by creating options, but you don't commit to that option until some sort of event. You feed all of that into your decision making and your risk management, and then when you implement, you keep on checking how much and in what way the different scenarios are playing out, and in particular, are those trigger events happening which shows you need to commit to one of your options. It's really important in this to have a time horizon which is far enough away that you can be interesting, and you're not just talking about today, but not so far away that it feels irrelevant. So I'd say something like 2030 is a good time horizon here. It's really important to make sure the scenarios are different from each other, so you're truly exploring variety. And there's a particular version of scenario planning where you take your existing existing strategy and place it into each of the worlds in turn to do what's called wind tunneling. Road mapping, I talked about, and this nobody voted for it, but just to make sure you know what it is, as I say, the semiconductor road mapping is the most famous. You can shape what's happening and you can confidently predict it, because you can predict, in this case, what technologies are occurring over the next 5 years. And how you do it, you bring together all those actors who are involved, you understand the trends, you create a vision and a direction and the specific steps in that direction, knowing that there's very little that can knock them to one side. When you implement, you're looking to coordinate and be coherent across the group, and you can feed that again into risk management. The key points here is the road mapping itself can attract more and more of the resources you need to create that roadmap. So it can become something of a self-fulfilling prophecy if it's done right. And also on the route, having trust is vital. So you need to use the process to grow the trust between the different players and then to maintain it, because they need to trust that everyone else will act in accordance with the roadmap. You can use the roadmap itself to monitor your progress. And then finally, 3 horizons. This is a method which takes a particular view of today and how things are playing out. So on the right there is a diagram which has as a vertical axis how prevalent, how dominant is a particular horizon, and on the x-axis is time. And the way it works, there is a current way of doing things in red, which is called Horizon 1, and that current way of doing things is struggling and is going on decline. It will eventually be replaced by a future system, which is a better fit, and that's the visionary future of Horizon 3 in green. But in order to get from here to there, you can't just leap in a single bound. You have to go through a transition and transformation zone, which is the Horizon 2, and that's the zone of innovations. So what you do with the 3 horizons process, again, you gather together the people and organizations who are relevant. You identify what is the way in which the current way of doing things is struggling. Step 1, step 2, what's your aspirational future? Step 3, what aspects of today, what hidden gems, what little pockets of the future exist today? And then what innovations can you push that can create that Horizon 2 that is the bridge into the future? Then you look at what's around today and say, well, what are the essential features of the status quo that we want to maintain into the future? Because one of the things which can hold back change is where people fear that something they really value is going to be destroyed, and then they'll cling on to it even more and try to prevent any process of change. So what are the essential features today that can be taken forward into the future, and then you can implement? I've seen 3 horizons used as a way of hosting a conversation between people who don't necessarily agree with each other on very much, but may have some possibility of shared alignment over the long term. And the people behind this method often talk about stewarding a preferred future into existence. That's a quick whistle-stop tour through those 4 different methods. Now I'll hand back to Leif and Matthias to take us into the groups. Leif, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Muchas gracias por eso. Hay todavía una gente que no ha escrito su letra en el chat box. Kifa, Alonso y Marlon, por favor, si pueden escribir su letra para que podamos dividirles en los grupos correspondientes. ¿Ya? Y la otra cosa es, por favor, que pongan sus cámaras, porque ahora vamos a ponerles en grupos de discusión y es muy bueno poder vernos. So in a minute, Matthias is going to divide us up into subgroups according to the letter that we chose. And I think, Matthias, maybe you should better put me in group B, actually, even though I voted D. I think that's, yeah. So we're going to discuss for 15 minutes in subgroups. So you're going to be together with people who voted the same as you. And the 3 questions are on the screen. I'm going to say it in Spanish. Entonces, en los grupos, subgrupos, ustedes van a estar con gente que también votaron igual que ustedes y vamos a pedir que discuten 3 cosas durante 15 minutos. Si sienten que tienen la habilidad de adaptar su proyecto o plataforma para acomodar cambios imprevistos en su contexto, dado sus limitaciones en proyectos, presupuestos, recursos humanos, prioridades del gobierno, etc. Segundo, que mecanismos existentes puedan ayudarles a hacer los cambios necesarios. Y tercero, si podrían estos métodos de futuros que he presentado por David, si podían ser útiles para ustedes para trabajar con incertidumbre en manera estructurada y cómo. So these are the 3 questions, and I think we're still like Alonso and Marlon, maybe they left. But I think, Matthias, you need to break us into groups now. Well, just before you do that, we need to appoint a facilitator. Hold on. Yeah, so so Camilo needs to step out. That's fine. Thank you for joining us, Camilo. We need to have a rapporteur, rather, and I can be the rapporteur for Group 1. And we need to have a rapporteur from, Group B. And for Group D, I would like to appoint somebody. That can be Simon. Are you willing to do that? Just capture briefly the discussion, the conclusions, and report back just in a few minutes, less than 5 minutes afterwards. Okay, thank you very much.
Matthias, I can't see the panel where I can vote.
Oh, that's all right, Marlon. So, where you... Tú hablas español, ¿no, Marlon?
Sí.
Okay. No sé si llegaste a tiempo para participar, o sea, cuando estaba la presentación de los diferentes
Sí, lo vi
cuadrantes.
vi todo, pero no veo el panel para votar.
¿A cuál cuadrante quisieras ir? ¿Al D o al B?
Al B.
Al B, ok. Te mando al B con live, ok. Ahí va. Tiene que darle a aceptar y ahí te va a mandar al grupo.
falta de participación del sector privado.
Okay. Welcome back. Bienvenidos de regreso al plenario. So, did you find the 15 minutes short? So, nosotros en el grupo de latinos sí podíamos haber hablado más, creo. So I think we could easily have spent more time in the subgroups. So we had a good discussion going. I'm going to ask now. Maybe you, Simon, could start to summarize the discussion you had in group D.
Yeah,
and I think you have about 5 minutes.
So Group D was talking about the three horizons mechanisms that David described for us. And we came up against the problem that our projects and the work that we do has funders who have particular timelines and budgets and deliverables. So part of the answer to that is the concept of adaptive management, which we've introduced. And that's possible but slow, as it was described. We tend not to be able to react quickly enough. And I don't think it's for want of us wanting to react quickly enough. It's the processes we have to go through in order to change the way the projects run take too long. So if you've only got a 5-year project, you might do half of the project doing one thing, decide it's not working, try to change it, and not have much of the project left when you have got to the different way of doing things. So that three horizons was very nicely described as long-term stewarding of a future, but with highly flexible short-term reactions. And we were talking, Lisa was talking about using it explicitly in applications to donors to say, this is how we're going to run things. We're going to have this one curve, which is the future we're going to try and go for. But we almost reserve the right to change things as we go along and make that a much more explicit part of the conversations we have with donors and see whether they're prepared to understand that need is there. There was conversation about the projects being too encapsulated in their little project planning box with little room for movement. And so one way of getting around that could be to use the programmatic themes of the UNDP to react to change in that way, rather than doing it just within the boundaries of one particular project. Try and see how you can use a theme like gender to say, okay, this is how we're going to run it. And maybe that will be able to transcend the shorter timescales that we're looking at. We were concluding just as the timer ran out that this could be part of the visioning phase where we work with stakeholders to suggest a particular direction that the project would go in towards more sustainability, towards contributing towards the SDGs, and that would be one of the three horizons. And the conclusion we sort of came to was that we've got 2 out of the 3 horizons working in our current system, but we need to find a way of including that third one in there. So that's the summary from Group D.
Thank you very much, Simon. Do you have comments from other people in your group, really quick? Otherwise, I'm just going to summarize the discussion in Group B. And I think most of the Latinos, we spoke in Spanish, so I can just give the summary in English. I'll do that. First of all, we observed that many of the people who actually work on the ground in the first lines of action tend to choose Group B. That was the case in our workshop with the Asians as well. So the people who are out there, most people choose Group B, and that is a reflection of like a feeling of lack of control. Everything is like you're just like in a whirlwind of things happening. So I think that's very interesting, actually, where maybe some of us who work more, headquarters or whatever, we may think that we have like more ability to control things in like a rational way. Anyway, so Marlon did point out that we are working with the targeted scenario analysis. So that is a sort of a futures method. I think you can say it's active work with scenarios, but that actually the methodology may not be the key thing. The key thing is to convince your stakeholders that they should work with scenarios at all. So it's really difficult to convince people that you should actually embrace this kind of planning. We concluded that many of us who work in development may be influenced by the kind of public type of planning where you have, here you're here and you want to go there and you have like a plan to get there. So we think that's very common in our world of development, and is maybe hard to break out of. We also discussed the limitations we have in timelines and budgets in projects and processes, but we also agreed that the flexibility to take different action, is larger when you move out in the medium and longer term. In the short term, it may be difficult to change, but if you take the longer view, you have more flexibility. Then some of the members of the group pointed out the huge difficulties to work in a political and institutional environment that is very chaotic and changes all the time, and also that we could try to insulate ourselves to some extent by, let's say, working more with the private sector, putting the private sector or other stakeholder groups that are maybe more stable in a more driver's seat. So there's also a possibility there. And then we finally said many of us understand and feel this situation that scenarios change all the time, and yet we are still kind of doing the same thing over and over with the the log frame planning. I mean, we need to kind of break out and embrace this uncertainty and be better at being cool with all the different scenarios that might happen. Then finally, just to wrap up, we do think the tools are very intriguing. We also feel we need to dig more into them, and in order to better understand how they might actually help us in our specific situations. So I'm going to stop there with the summary from the group. All right, let me see here in my plan. We are about to get to the end of the event, and we can discuss a little bit. We have time for it, but what we're going to do now is to do another poll with you. Vamos a pedirles votar otra vez si este tipo de ejercicio, de metodologías, si esto ha sido beneficioso para ustedes. Matías va a poner otra vez un poll para votar, y vamos a pedirles que votan en tres cosas. Primero, si esto ha sido interesante para ustedes, y si ha sido relevante, y si están interesados en profundizar un poco más en este tipo de trabajo y entender mejor los métodos. Entonces, so if you can please your vote, and we'll see how people have found this event. Okay, I'm going to give people just a minute to cast their votes. Okay.
Not sure what happened with the Zoom poll, but it gather more information that it should have.
We are extremely successful because we have more than 100% saying that this is very interesting. I think this is great to work like this. I like this methodology.
Can we feed that back to a donor?
I want to put it in my performance report.
Yeah. I don't know what happened. It started growing.
Are you there? Andrew, are you there? I hope you noticed this, okay? Yeah.
Yes, you've done very good. I'd like you to bring this math to some other areas of our work.
Exactly. like then we can only be successful. But anyway, also relatively speaking, so relativamente, mucha gente piensa que esto es interesante y relevante. No hay nadie que no piensa que sea interesante o relevante. Y todo el mundo también quiere seguir. So I think this is very encouraging. We still have a few minutes. I would like to say to talk a little bit more about David. So we've brought in David as a potential resource person who might be able to help you with different processes in different countries. We also might be able to do more of this kind of events and dig deeper into this methodology within the community. But David is also available as a consultant to do work of support in planning exercises with the different teams nationally. And we hope that he will continue as a part of our Green Commodities community. And you see his email there, actually, yeah, and Twitter and website. So you're welcome to contact him. David, do you want to say just one word on that?
Just that it's, I very much appreciate the chance to share with you some thoughts about futures methods. I've been very impressed with the Green Commodities program. I know Charlie O'Malley as well as Simon and a few others. I've been following you from afar for a long time, and anything I can do to help would be fantastic. So hope to work with you again soon.
Right, thank you very much, David. And now our godfather of the Green Commodities community is Pascal Fabier, and he has been putting a lot of work into this and helping also guide the design and got the contact with David, etc. So I'm going to pass the word on to Pascal for a few final words.
Thank you. Thanks, Live. First of all, thanks, David, Live, and also Matthias for doing this workshop twice. Matthias and Live got up at 2 o'clock in the morning to have the first one with our Asian colleagues, so much appreciated. Hats off. I'm very pleased we had this workshop. Both this one and the one this morning were equally interesting, led to similar outcome. We are in the B&D space. And it's funny for me, when the idea of organizing came up, it's clear. I have been working half of my life in the private sector where leading multinational are doing scenario planning for breakfast. I'm exaggerating clearly, but this is a common practice in business. And for the last 20 years, I've been working in the development sector where I have not encountered that. I've come across the systemic traditional planning with a little bit of risk management. If that happens, how do we mitigate the risk? And that risk management table is on page 78 of a product. So for me, it was very clear that there is a gap here. We in the development community have to become more literate with working with variable futures, because the future starts now. Doesn't matter the length of the project. We sit always at the beginning of a future. And whether we are in design phase or a midterm evaluation, we can revisit this. So all of us will continue working in the development sector. Some of us will end up designing new projects And I think it's time for us to introduce this concept at the time of design of multi-million projects, where we may not end up with one single lock frames, but the potential ramification of lock frames or different horizon. So I very much welcome that. And I look forward to meeting all of you to talk more about this. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Great. This was exceptional. We had done even a few minutes before our 90 minutes are up. So I really thank David for coming on. I think this has been really a great experience so far, and we hope to to continue working with you, David. And I also thank everybody who took the time out of your busy schedules. I'm also happy, yo estoy muy feliz de que podíamos manejar entre inglés y español. Espero que haya funcionado también para los latinos. Ustedes saben que siempre es difícil manejar, ¿no? Con el equipo global. So with that, I will basically say thank you very much and see you in the next event.
Gracias.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you, everybody.
Bye.
See you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Gracias.
Chao.
Bye, 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 bye.
Bye, bye.
Gracias por todo. Chao, chao.
Gracias.
Chao.
Nos vemos, César.
Chao,
Chao.
gracias.
Dale, chao.
Chao.